Hey everybody, it's Anna and welcome back to my booktube channel. This video is going to be my Geekly Wrap-Up from February 10th through February 16th. This week I finished one audiobook, I read 4 books, and I played a buttload of board games. I'm not going to talk about all of the board games because I ended up actually repeat playing a bunch of things I'd played, so I'm going to talk about the new stuff, but let's go ahead and do the books first. The first book that I finished this week was my audiobook. It was Blue Lily, Lily Blue, which is the 3rd book in the Raven Cycle series by Maggie Stiefvater. If you haven't heard yet, I'm actually reading this series for the first time exclusively on audio, and so I'm not going to talk about it because it's the 3rd book in a series, and I think everybody who's read it already knows what it's about, and I don't want to give any spoilers. But I didn't like it as much as the 2nd book, but I am looking forward to the conclusion of the series. I'm simultaneously dreading the conclusion of the series because then it'll be over, so I'm taking a bit of a break from that. I also read mostly graphic novels this week. I finished reading Knife's Edge by Hope Larson and illustrated by Rebecca Mock. This is the 2nd book in the duology that I got for Christmas this year about these twin siblings, Alex and Cleopatra, and they have these old family heirlooms that lead them to a family treasure. I didn't think that this volume was quite as strong as the first one. I thought that especially Cleo's character, being mainly the girl on the ship and everything, was kind of a little bit cliched about people coming up to her and being like, oh, girls can't do this, girls can't do that. I'm just like, okay, really? This is a fantasy adventure. Why is this being included when clearly that's not the case in this world? So why is this artificial, oh, girls can't thing happening? I also thought that some of the representation of the indigenous people in this book was a little iffy. I can't really speak to that because I'm white, but there was an awful lot of other characters calling them savages and stuff until they got to know them. And I know that that's accurate for the time and these are words and things, but that was just something that I noticed as I was reading. I was like, I don't really feel super positive about that. I also finished reading another Blackathon book. I reread LaGuardia by Nnedi Okorafor for the graphic novel challenge. I've talked about this already before, but basically this is the story of a woman named Future, and she is pregnant with a baby that has alien DNA. So in this version of the world, aliens can travel through airports and such to our planet and vice versa. And space exploration has happened, aliens come here, but the various countries of the world are having issues dealing with aliens coming from outer space and living among us, and then it further complicates things when humans and aliens start to share DNA. So Future actually shares DNA with this plant that's called Let Me Live, that is one of the only survivors of its species from a massive war that's happening in Nigeria. So Future has to flee from Nigeria, smuggling this plant into the country so that it can live in the United States basically as a war refugee. This really held up so well the second time that I read it. It's just as timely as ever. The science fiction is on point in the way that it really fleshes out a world that is unique, but also makes you think about a lot of the issues with travel bans, racism, and xenophobia that we're facing today. I really love this series. I gave it 5 out of 5 again. I think everybody should go and read it. Then I read another comic book that I had just gotten out of the library. So I read Blackathon, America's Sweetheart by Kwanzaa Osagyefo, and I found out about this from Jerry's channel, Onyx Pages, and this is kind of an alternate universe where what if the only people that had superpowers were black, and it is the origin story of Ellie, who's basically a Superman kind of figure. She can fly, she has super strength, wants to use her powers for good and to help people. And I feel the book tries to get into these questions of what sort of moral responsibilities do superheroes have to defending people, and do they have a responsibility to defend people who may in the future grow up to hurt them and mistreat them, etc. But I think that the book was trying to do too much in too short an amount of time, so those big questions were kind of curtailed mostly into an action scene that I thought really didn't make a whole lot of sense because it wasn't an important part of the story up until that point. So this was still fine. I enjoyed the story, I enjoyed the concept behind it, but I gave it 3 out of 5 stars because I think ultimately it didn't really stick the landing. Then I read my last book for Blackathon, this week at least. I'm still reading my actual last book, An Unkindness of Ghosts by Rivers Solomon. Trigger warnings for a bunch of the things in this book, for things like rape, sexual violence, racist slurs, slavery, torture, a lot of things, because basically this is a book about a spaceship that's called Matilda that is traveling and taking a bunch of people from our Earth to a different planet because our planet has been destroyed, and basically this ship is trying to find a new home for the human race. The thing is that this ship has basically like recreated an apartheid society in a way where the people that are like more white or light-skinned and can pass for white, they live in the upper decks of the ship, and they get access to a lot of privileges like good health care. They have lots of food. The heat is always turned on there. And then the people that are dark-skinned or black or, you know, any of those other kind of things, there's like a very colorist hierarchy in this ship. They live in the lower decks, and they have to do the jobs that are dangerous and that nobody wants. They have to do things like work and be exposed to large amounts of radiation. The heat keeps getting turned off there, so people are suffering from like frostbite and having to get their limbs amputated and stuff like that. So they are truly second-class citizens in every sense of the word. And this book follows Aster, who is a young, like gender non-conforming, gender fluid, perhaps. I don't think that they use the exact word in the book, but it's something along those lines. Not cis, that's for sure. So Aster is a young, like, gender fluid, autistic doctor, and she is really interested in trying to, like, figure out what makes this ship tick. So her mother, who died by suicide when Aster was just a baby, left behind a bunch of, like, these really cryptic notebooks and stuff that were about the workings of the ship, because her mother worked on the star that, like, keeps the ship powered going forth into space. So Aster, like, starts to figure out that there's a mystery that's hidden within these notes that's kind of encoded that will lead to her being able to free herself and the people that are like her from the tyranny of their oppressive overlords. I thought that this book was really, really amazing. I did have some kind of like, where is this going thoughts there at the end. I think that the ending kind of struggled a little bit to reach its conclusion, but ultimately I think that this was a fantastic book. It is really intense and it's really difficult to read, so like wait till you're in a good headspace to read it, because I definitely had to put the book down a couple times and just breathe. But I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars. I love all of the things that Rivers Solomon writes, and I can't wait to read more from them. And then this weekend, I played a lot of board games because we were invited to basically this like weekend-long get-together at an Airbnb that our friend and his wife had rented out, and they basically like invited a bunch of their friends, and people were coming and going all weekend and just playing literally hundreds of board games. So this guy works in game design, a bunch of the other people work in game design, so we had access to a lot of games that, like, if we had all of those games, there'd be no way we would be able to afford having all of them. But we pulled them all together and we made it work. So I'm gonna go through the highlights of some of the games that I played. Obviously, it's not gonna be everything. I think my favorite of the board games I think my favorite of the board games that we played this weekend was Taverns of Tiefenthal, which is by the same designer who made the game Quacks of Quedlinburg. I've talked about that before. They don't actually play anything like each other. The only similarity that they have is the charming, like, medieval German art style. But Taverns of Tiefenthal is basically a deck-building, dice-drafting game where you are a tavern proprietor and you are trying to produce your beers to get the most people to come into your tavern and give you money, because that's how that works. There's also a lovely little like subplot victory tracker where you can basically provide alcohol to the church in exchange for bonuses and benefits and stuff like that. We played it at 4 people. I thought the game was really fun. There was lots of great player interaction. There's a lot of like little modular bits to the board, so you can play it in a bunch of different scenarios and setup conditions. We just did the basic one for the first time, but I think it's gonna have a lot of replay value because you can just decide, hey, we're playing with this set of rules or this set of victory conditions or something like that. But I really, really enjoyed it, just basic. We also played a game called Chocolate Factory, which was a solid 3 out of 5 for me. It's a programming game about, you know, basically getting a bunch of cacao beans and converting them into various chocolates so that you can go around and fulfill orders. I did think, this is going to be my criticism of a lot of games this weekend, that the game is a little bit too fiddly and a little bit too too much what they call multiplayer solitaire. So you're sitting down with a group of people and you're ostensibly all playing the game together, but your choices mean that you don't really interact as players. Like, it doesn't matter what choice I make personally, that really only has an effect on me and my endgame scoring conditions instead of on somebody that I'm sitting down at the table with. I thought it was a really pretty game. I loved the fact that they had all of the little different chocolate meeples that had different colors and stuff, and it was really beautiful, but just as a game, it didn't really do it for me. Neither did this other game that we played that was called In the Hall of the Mountain King. That was definitely, again, another really multiplayer solitaire game. You're these, like, trolls that are digging holes looking for glory or victory points, whatever it's called, and you're turning different types of rocks into tunnels and statues and idols, and that game was just too long. We played it at 5 people. I don't even know if I'd want to replay this game again at 2 or 3. Like, it was off to an okay start at the beginning, but again, it's just so fiddly. There are so many tiny little pieces that you're constantly shuffling back and forth, and that adds nothing to the experience of playing the game. I felt like many of the choices that I made actually had no impact on anyone else's experience of playing the game. The only thing where you might have a little bit of player interaction is that everyone is drafting their troll workers from the same pool of available workers and such there, but that was it for a game that took about 3 hours, and I just was not here for that. That was not really something that I enjoyed at all. So 3 out of 5 there for me, because I don't think it's a bad game, I just don't think it's very good, and I don't think that it was necessarily for me. You know what I'm saying? We played a couple of other games that I won't go into right now, but suffice to say we played Era Medieval Age, which is kind of a roll and write game. We played a game called Isle of Cats, which is an interesting pentominoes or polyominoes, whatever they're called, type of puzzle game, and we played a couple different little playtesty things. I also got to try the Witcher RPG for the first time, which was fun. It definitely took me back to my Pathfinder days. There are a lot of tables that you roll on, so many tables. It is a very mathy, a lot more crunchy rules set than like 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons is. I will say I did have one complaint about the game, and it had nothing to do with the gameplay, but it's something that is like something I really strongly ethically disagree with in board game design, and that is the way that the seduction rolls work, surprising no one. Now, I think it's great if you like talk with your players and your DM in advance and you want to have sexy stuff in your RPGs. That is fine. I'm all for that. That's not what I'm talking about here. But there is an opportunity in the game, depending on what skills you have, for you to roll to seduce another player or an NPC. Where I take issue with that is the fact that the person that is being seduced then gets to roll a resist coercion test. Just like, no, that's not a good thing to basically have something that you want to be sexy or romantic only be mechanically encoded into the game in terms of power and control, because coercion implies that there is a power differential and that consent is being violated, and I'm not okay with that in tabletop RPGs. Like, that actually got to me a lot more than I realized it, and I was like, oh, I don't actually want to make this roll if that means that someone is trying to resist me coercing them, because number one, I don't think that that's good game design. It's pretty sexist. And number two, I also didn't want to make the other player feel really uncomfortable, because that's how I would feel if I was on the receiving end of something and I had to resist coercion. And the GM was kind of like, oh, don't worry about it. It's just the rule is written that way. It's just a bad rule. But it's like, game designers, fucking do better. You can do better than write resist coercion. That's kind of my... That's my little game design rant about that. I don't know. I think if you're going to mechanically encode sexy stuff or flirty stuff into your game, you need to really, really think hard about how you're doing that in terms of consent so that your game doesn't come across as rapey, because nobody wants to play a rapey RPG. Like, no one that I want to play with anyway. Alright, and that is going to do it for this week's Geekly Wrap-Up. I mercifully kept this short, even though I had a lot to talk about. Comment down below with something that you have enjoyed this past week, and as always, if you like what you see here, make sure to subscribe to my channel, because that is the best way to get updates every time I post a new video. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!